My best friend has crossed the point of no return as I watch helplessly. I've never struggled with substance abuse at any point in my entire life. Throughout my life most of my friends have been similar to me in this way. I've done more stuff than most of them, but only 2 of my friends have tried as many different substances as I have. One of them got clean in 2017 after taking too high of a dose and is still clean to this day. The other is my best friend Rodney. We were roommates for a few years until I moved in with my girlfriend in April of last year. My mom took the both of us in until we were able to get back on our feet when our townhouse burned down. Before we lost our townhouse in mid-2019, Rodney was in a pretty experimental phase of his substance use. He was having mushrooms a lot, and because it was in front of me so much I would indulge too. I was personally doing blow at the time, which he wasn't really engaging in with me, saying the hangovers were too much for him at the time and he found the days after too depressing. The X got pretty out of hand for him. He told me they helped him feel human, as he suffered from pretty severe anxiety. Once our supplier's stock started getting inconsistent, he eventually drew back out of necessity because he couldn't handle the withdrawals. Shortly after this is where we moved in with my mom. My mom and her husband are extremely anti-substance. They rarely drink and have both never so much as been in the same room as grass. Our being welcome pivoted pretty directly on the understanding that we wouldn't be bringing any substances into the house. Rodney, who hasn't spent a day sober since we were 13 years old, actually acclimated shockingly quickly. He respected my parents' rules and kept any grass he had in his toolbox at work, but rarely smoked it simply due to the inconvenience of it. Come December of that year though, that all changed. Rodney went to Christmas dinner at his family home and was surprised that his dad wasn't there. Rodney's twin brother arrived late to the dinner and was a bit upset, informing everybody that their dad had called him that day with some news. Turns out their dad is gay, but being an older dude stayed in the closet due to fear of discrimination for his whole life. He had made the decision to move back to Ontario because he had been in a secret relationship with his boyfriend for an undeclared period of time and couldn't really handle facing the family he raised. The dude literally told one of his 3 kids, "Hey, I'm gay, I have a boyfriend and I'm running away with him. If you could let your mom and siblings know for me, that'd be great," and walked out of their lives completely. On Christmas, Rodney took it really hard. Overnight he shut me out emotionally. He wouldn't go into details about what was on his mind like he usually did, and I didn't want to push him. He became severely depressed and he found a new dealer and started buying X by the hundreds. For months this dude just popped bar after bar until they barely did anything to him anymore. He ended up getting very close to an older man who runs a popular sandwich shop and deli in our town, as one of our mutual friends would go there to smoke grass with him in the back room sometimes. They liked his stories. He led a very interesting life. Well, after a bit, Rodney had been going there long enough for this deli owner to open up to him about the fact that he frequently did dope. Rodney, being no stranger to trying new substances and in a particularly vulnerable state, asked if he could try it. Deli guy wouldn't let him for a long while, but eventually cracked after a few weeks of pestering. He took dope every other day for 2 weeks after that, didn't sleep for most of it, and still went to work every single day through it all. He got reckless about substances in my parents' place. He'd be so messed up he'd pass out in random spots in the house and would be so wired other times he'd start cleaning the kitchen at 2 a.m. and wake everyone up. My parents knew something was up, and it all came to a head when he started getting so messed up that he'd start sparking up right there in his bedroom without being lucid enough to remember he wasn't allowed. My parents gave him the ultimatum that if it didn't stop immediately he wasn't going to be allowed to live there anymore. I ended up coming clean to all of our other friends that Rodney was going off the rails during a mushroom trip I was on when he wasn't there. My entire life had become mitigating the tension between him and my parents, and the stress of it all was too much for me. He wasn't himself, he wasn't opening up to me anymore, and I was losing my best friend. He refused to talk about the substance use with anyone and kept telling people we were all freaking out over nothing and turning him into some kind of spectacle that we could judge for entertainment. He permanently cut several of our close friends out of his life because they weren't supporting him. He just convinced himself that nobody actually cared and they just wanted something to gossip about. He got kicked out of my parents last April, and moved into a crappy motel in our town on a weekly rate. He was messed up on X one day and came clean to me that he started sleeping with the deli guy during their dope sessions. It seemed to me like he was really questioning his identity after everything with his dad, and was going off the rails trying to get his head in order, and was doing a dangerously poor job at it. I started to withdraw from him after he got kicked out of my mom's. By this point 2020 was in full swing. I'd see him outside my house from time to time and he told me he was cleaning up, not doing the X anymore. He had a fair number of other substance stories, mostly blow binges, despite the fact that he used to hate blow but was suddenly all for it. He would talk about hanging out with other people who I'd never met, doing substances with them. He'd always keep it vague though. Aside from the mysteriousness, he seemed like he was pretty much back to his old self for a while. When we hung out it finally felt normal. Sure, he had his stories, but they were much more in tune with the occasional fun type stories they used to be for us than the constant it became for him at one point. I thought he was getting better. I was wrong. Hydros were on the market now. Rodney picked a few up and took them to a test site. They were clean. He flaunted that receipt like he'd just found the damn Ark of the Covenant. Suddenly, he was doing hydros almost daily. He justified it in his head that, because they were clean, they were safe. Kept trying to do them with me but I refused. At first, he was fine not bringing them around me. But as time went on and the 2020 restrictions relaxed to allow in-home gatherings again, he started disappearing to the bathroom for a while when he'd come over and come out nodding. I didn't say much. Felt like the words would be wasted on him. During 2020 he started doing way more and his tolerance shot through the roof. Within less than a month, him and I had planned a blow night with another buddy of ours. We picked up the blow, and he asked me to give him a ride to this random address in town. I pulled up outside and it was junkies as far as the eye could see, a couple cops posted up, and what looked to be some kind of social service building. He ran inside for a minute and came back out with a paper bag. I asked him what it was and he confessed to me that his tolerance has gotten too high to do the hydros nasally. So he's been going to the safe injection sites to get supplies he can IV with. He also confessed to me that he had bought some dope from one of the junkies outside, just for the come down after we did blow. He told me that he is just having fun and that I have nothing to worry about, that he's not some lazy junkie, he still has his life together etc. Then he admitted he's been banging it for a few weeks now, and last time he was at my place the reason he was nodding out so harshly is because he was still nailing down the right dope amount to inject. I pretended in the moment that I believed him, that it was no big deal, but that night I watched him inject himself all night. It made me sick. I took my boyfriend to a restaurant for his birthday and he got mad at me and cried. My boyfriend and I are gay. He had his 20th birthday last Saturday. I asked him if he had any plans or if he wanted to do anything special for it, but he told me that he didn't really want to. I asked him if maybe his parents were going to do anything with him, and he got really quiet. I felt sort of confused by this as he's a very outgoing person, and loves talking and hanging out with people, but when it comes to personal details about himself, he tends to clam up. Ever since finals last semester he's been really down. He keeps telling me that everything is fine, but his actions speak louder than his words. I wanted to do something nice for him, especially since he seemed a little upset after the holidays, so I subtly hinted to him that I wanted to go somewhere special. I told him that it could just be us and he seemed to be okay with this, so we set up a plan for his big day. We ended up planning to go to this really nice sushi place and then we would go out and get cheesecake for dessert. Afterwards, we planned to spend the night at my apartment and binge watch some movies that he likes. He really seemed to like this plan, and he told me that he was looking forward to it. The week before his birthday I could tell that he was feeling at least a little bit better, and he told me that he was very excited for Saturday. Eventually Saturday came around, and we met up at my place around 3:30. Immediately I could tell that something was off about him. He didn't really want to make eye contact with me, and his face and cheeks were red. It looked like he had been crying earlier, but I didn't want to say anything or point anything out. After hanging out in my apartment for about an hour we took my car to the sushi place and sat down for dinner. The restaurant was great, and he told me that it was some of the best food that he had ever had. After we had both finished eating, we talked for a while about how he was doing. He told me that he always gets pretty upset during the holidays and his birthday, but he was glad that we were out doing this. I told him that I was just happy that he was happy, and that he could tell me anytime if something was wrong. I could see tears welling up in his eyes, but he quickly wiped them away, and everything seemed to be back to normal. After dessert, we both got into my car, and I told him that I wanted to talk to him about something serious. I told him that I loved him, and that I want to be a part of his future. He agreed and told me that he loved me too. After he said that, I heard him laugh under his breath. I asked him what was so funny, and he told me that we had dated longer than his parents did before they got married. When he said this, I noticed his voice getting shaky, and he looked away from me, looking out the window. I asked him how his parents were doing and he didn't respond. After sitting in silence for a few minutes, I started my car and began the drive back home to my apartment. After what felt like an eternity, I asked him why he never talked about his family to me. After all, we have been together for almost 7 months now, but I know nothing about his life before he became an adult. He dryly responded, "When did you start caring so much about my family? Last time I checked, you're sleeping with me, not them." I felt my face get hot, but I didn't want to say anything I would regret, so I just held my tongue. I just sat there feeling dumb and embarrassed, his hand limply held in mine. We just sat in the car for what felt like hours, not talking to each other. Once I parked my car in the parking lot at my place, I asked him why he never wanted me to meet them. When we started dating, I told my parents about him a few months in, and after meeting they got along great together. I want to have that connection with his family too, but any time in the past that I brought it up he would change the subject. He still didn't answer me, so I kept prying about it until I heard him sort of choking up. Eventually I just flat out asked him if he was too ashamed of being with me to tell his parents, and he started sobbing quietly, embarrassed. Once I realized he was upset, I immediately shut up, and apologized a million times, and I told him that I didn't mean it, and that I was only asking because I felt like he was hiding me from people. He looked me in the eyes with his face bright red and told me, "My parents don't consider me their son anymore. They kicked me out. I haven't talked to them in 2 years." After he told me this, he got out of my car and slammed the passenger side door shut. I just sat there inside shocked. I knew that he wasn't close with his parents, but I didn't know that they disowned him. He told me once that he grew up in a very conservative Christian environment, and that he was out at his senior year when he was 17. I got out of my car, and I confronted him outside of my building. He didn't look me in the eyes, instead he was focusing on his phone. I told him that I was so sorry and I had no idea, and that he means so much to me. I started tearing up, and my voice started breaking while I said all of this. He told me he was getting an Uber home, and that we could talk later. The driver pulled into the parking lot after 10 minutes of us just standing outside in the cold both crying. He got in, and the driver sped the car away. The next morning, I asked him if he was okay, and if he wanted to talk to me about anything, but he told me that he wanted to have some time to himself to think about things. It's been a week now, and I am extremely worried for his physical and mental health. I'm scared that he would hurt himself. Update: my best friend has crossed the point of no return as I watch Helplessly. Things got a lot worse. Rodney's 24th birthday is at the end of this month. I got him a vintage deck turntable as he used to love them. I invited him over to give to him early and didn't say anything about the gift as I wanted it to be a surprise, but unfortunately he never showed up. I spam called and texted but got nothing. He eventually called me hours after he was supposed to come by sounding absolutely off his dome, said he fell asleep and just woke up. I told him he had to come through the following day to make it up to me. He agreed. The next day he got sent home from work as his boss said he was visibly inebriated and was a safety concern for the shop. He lost it on his boss and threw everything away by quitting on the spot. This was a new boss at his shop, his old boss who he worked under for over a half-decade, completed his entire apprenticeship with, got his certification with, recently moved up in the company and isn't really there to advocate for him now. They tried to talk him out of it but he walked out. Eventually, several hours later, he did make it to my house. He looked haggard, and his voice sounded all creaky and barely coherent. Before he would even talk to me he said he needed to use the bathroom. Stayed in there for a half hour. Came out barely able to stand straight and called his regional manager while completely blasted to yell about how offended he was by what his direct superior had done. I tried to get him off the phone but he essentially just did everything he could to burn that bridge right to the ground. They won't take his calls now. He opened his turntable. He cried when he saw it, thanked me up and down and told me how much it meant to him. Then nodded off halfway through expressing his gratitude. When he eventually came to, he didn't even remember the turntable interaction. Just kept yelling incoherently about how his boss only sent him home cause he feels threatened and he is jealous that Rodney has the highest numbers in the shop. He cycled through that for a few hours. It was excruciating. I mean, I guess I'm the idiot for thinking that buying him the one thing he needed to reconnect with his hobby would fix everything. It hurt my feelings a little bit though, admittedly, that he seemed to lose interest so fast. He was so far removed from logical thought, he didn't even seem like the same person. I felt in that moment the way I assume people do when dealing with belligerent booze-drinking family members. From that moment I knew that I was going to have to confront him and tell him that if he wasn't willing to get clean, I was going to have to take a step back until he was. I dropped him off at home that night and helped him bring his stuff up. I needed time to think before going ahead with this. Said goodbyes and just cried into my girlfriend's arms for hours. I was just so angry. I was furious that he had taken it this far and now I was going to lose one of the most important people in the world to me because of substances. I felt so numb by the time I settled down. It was an awful night. I ended up telling our clean friend Jackson everything, as he worked for a rehab center in our city during his recovery for years and still had connections there. He basically agreed that I had to stop enabling Rodney and agreed with my plan to take a step back. This morning Jackson messaged me. Rodney had reached out to him and come clean about everything. That he's been doing tons of dope just to fight off withdrawals. And he admitted that he was in way too deep and was utterly terrified for his life. I messaged him immediately and just said good morning to him and that I hoped his weekend went well. Reminded him I loved him. He told me right away about the conversation he was having with Jackson and he told me he needed to go to rehab. How he needed help. How he just wanted to be happy with his life again and doesn't want to lose everything. We talked all morning this morning. Rodney told me he made it all through yesterday without doing any dope but he cracked this morning. Scraped all his tins for anything he could get. He told me he felt so out of control of himself and he just needs support to get better. He's ready to get clean. He doesn't want to be just another junkie. We're still messaging back and forth a little. I'm talking to Jackson in the back end. Jackson just told me he's pulled some strings to get Rodney into the rehab that saved his life 4 years ago. He's getting admitted tomorrow morning. Rodney can't afford it but somehow Jackson has negotiated a reduced rate for Rodney to go and has taken care of his first month's cost. They're gonna help him get some income assistance and they're gonna accept whatever the government is willing to provide even if it doesn't pay the cost in full. I cried at my desk. I'm so damn proud of him for taking this step and, in a way, I'm also relieved that I didn't need to force it.